Ladies and gentlemen, it's Friday. It looks like we made it. I hope everyone's having a beautiful day. I hope you got plans for the weekend. I hope you got to wake up in the embrace of the person you love the most. So I hope the sun is shining, the birds are singing, and the wind is at your back. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our distinguished guest today, Regina Huber. If you're a team leader or manager craving career advancement, Regina is the guiding force you've been searching for. With a profound understanding of the challenges you face, feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or perhaps overlooked, Regina draws upon a remarkable journey of personal and professional growth to inspire and uplift. Regina's narrative unfolds from her roots as the self proclaimed shyest kid in the village to a stellar 16-year career at Boston Consulting Group, where she ascended to leadership positions and managed global offices. Yet, craving new horizons, she embarked on a transformative journey that took her from successful entrepreneurship in Argentina to a painful setback in Brazil, losing both her business and self esteem due to a fraudulent partnership. Undeterred, Regina's resilient spirit led her to New York, where she courageously began rebuilding her confidence, merging holistic studies, leadership, and neuroscience. She discovered a profound purpose in mindset, energy, and heart set. As she rebuilt her own life, Regina recognized a shared struggle among women in financial and tech services. Brilliant, yet unrecognized. Regina's mission became clear: inspire others to overcome these challenges. Her proven methods have helped individuals achieve rapid promotions, negotiate substantial raises, and reclaim control over their professional destinies. Today, Regina stands as a beacon of an inspiration, ready to guide you toward your next career milestone. Ladies and gentlemen, Regina Huber, how are you today?
I am doing great. How are you today, George?
I'm fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm excited to talk to you. I've been looking forward to this, and we've kind of touched a little bit in that introduction. We touched a little bit on who you are and who you got to be. But I was wondering maybe you could share a personal story about something that has really transcended the way you see the world in the last few years.
Yes, there are definitely a myriad of stories in my adventurous life. I have had a very eclectic life, as I like to think about it. It started in Germany, as you said, as the shyest little girl in the village. And this adventurous spirit inside of me has always pushed me out to the world a little bit. That's at least how I felt it was. And so at 19, I moved to Munich, and then I really never stopped moving ever since. So I moved to Madrid after Munich, abroad for the very first time at 26, and I've since lived in several different countries on several different continents, and worked on five continents as well. And this very rich multicultural experience is, I think, what shaped me into who I am today. And then there are all these little stories, of course. We all have our rejection stories, we have our
Sure.
adventure stories, we have our pain stories, our growth stories. Yes, I believe that one of the stories that really shaped me was a not so happy one with a
Yeah.
fraudulent business partner in Brazil, which taught me many, many different lessons. Of course, there was a big loss of money involved. I lost a business eventually through this experience. But most importantly, at the time, I lost my self esteem and my confidence. And I learned how to rebuild it. I learned how to step out of this victim mode that it is all too easy to fall into a self-empowering mindset. And this was a big, big growth experience for me. It didn't happen from one day to the next, but it was a process that has definitely um, shaped who I am today. I have a lot of really interesting adventure stories too that are much happier than this one. But I wanted to share this because a lot
Yeah.
of people go through challenges, and I believe that we all learn through our challenges.
Yeah, it's one of my mentors growing up. Was a very successful businessman, and he decided that he was going to get into the fishing industry in Cabo. He went down there and he bought some boats, and he had what he called his Mexican baptism, and that was losing almost everything. And it sounds similar to, uh, I like the idea of a baptism, because in some level it's like you are being initiated into the other world's ideas of business and who you are. And on some level, when you go to start a business in another country, you are dealing with all of another culture's ideas of your identity, unfairly, probably on a lot of different angles. But maybe we could dive into like what happened down there. Like, were there
Yeah.
unrealistic expectations when you went down there? Was there a friendship that was sort of, manipulated? Like what happened in that story?
Yeah, no, it was really somebody who turned out to be fraudulent, to embezzle money from a mutual account that we had set up. What
Mm-hmm.
happened is I had my business. It was for the most part, it was my business. It was a dance and holistic wellness studio.
Mm-hmm.
It was a brick and mortar business for which I had bought a house. I had it built out. It took a while, of course. It was a big house. I put all my money into it, all my efforts, all my heart and my passion into it. And when it was finally all ready and we were ready to inaugurate, and I had invited all these people to this big inauguration party, that was when I found out that he had embezzled money from an account we had for another project that we wanted to start, sort of a side project. So his role in my business was actually only a partial role. I was going to use his name for part of the business, right? Because that's just
Sure,
how that collaboration was
yeah.
going to work. And then this happened. So what that meant is, now not only could we not do the second project, which was not the big issue really, but I could not trust him for what we already had. It was all of a sudden, crumbling for me, because it did depend greatly on his name. So that was what happened there. And I think one mistake I really made is I didn't do my due diligence. I had always been really going with the flow, which had worked out just fine until then, right? And all of a sudden, also, there was this doubt that although I'd done really everything by myself in the past, okay, there are always people who we collaborate with, but I had walked on my own path pretty much. And all of a sudden I thought, okay, maybe there's somebody who can help a little bit. And maybe it's just better if there's someone else, you're in this country, you don't know everything so well. And that was, I think, one of my mistakes or learning curves, rather,
Right.
when I figured out later that I could have perfectly done it by myself. I didn't really need this other person. I had done it before. I had I had founded and opened and successfully entertained my own business, also brick and mortar business in Argentina before. And that despite having to fight against corrupt city authorities. I even won a lawsuit against the city of Buenos Aires. I mean, I was totally able and capable of doing this. And why did I not trust myself enough and think I needed somebody else there to help me? I think that was one of the things, but also to just not ask around enough. I trusted this person because he had a name, because I had met him on a friendship basis, and we had done some other small business. I was actually a customer in a way because I took classes with him. So all of this seemed enough, while I believe that there was actually an inner voice, an intuitive voice that was whispering to me saying, hey, you know what, that doesn't sound quite right. Something's not quite right. And I didn't listen to it because I wanted it to be right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that confirmation bias that gets us sometimes. But
Yeah.
it's such a unique, well, maybe the unique is not the right word. I think that in the world of entrepreneurship, like, we're faced on both sides. One is that you can't do it alone, and the other two is who can you trust? And those
Yep.
two forces kind of come at each other at a level that coalesces in that inner voice, and you really have to hone that inner voice, that heart set, like you call it. Maybe you could maybe talk a little bit about that more, because we do need each other to grow. But how do you trust people, and what happens when you trust and you get burned?
Yes, absolutely. I'm all for co-creation and collaboration.
Right.
Okay. I just believe now that, first of all, I have learned to trust my intuition more again. I have really practiced this heart set, this one asset that we can find in our heart, of many, many treasures that we can find in our hearts, right?
Yeah.
So I had to relearn to trust this inner voice. I had to also relearn to, I don't know if that's even the case. I do trust people relatively easily because I always want to see the best in people. However, that trusting in business situations where money is involved, where it's something deeper, a longer term collaboration. I think I'm just much more cautious with that right now. And I'm also more cautious with who I let into my core business. So one thing is to collaborate on different projects
Right.
with other people, which I love doing. And another thing is, who do I let into my business as somebody who has an important voice in it, or even an external reputation voice, and there I'm pretty protective, I have to say, because also it's so hard to account for other people's messages. Now, oftentimes, even sometimes, it has happened to me on podcasts or in life situations where it's then hard to correct, where people quote some celebrities that I do not resonate with at all because I know too much, right? So that these are situations that are a bit tricky. And when your good name is at risk, I think we need to be protective as business owners. That does not mean we cannot collaborate with others.
Yeah, I think that is, maybe it's where I'm at in life, or maybe that's the state of the world, or I'm not sure exactly what the reasoning is, but it does seem like we are in this new space where we are trying to come up with a message when we co-create. And even though we may come from different parts of culture, or we come from different parts of business, how do we get a message together that resonates? Like, what do you do when you meet with someone that's in a business that you like but kind of has a different message? How do you co-create with that?
Yes, I think they can coexist
Right.
and coexist peacefully and even co-creatively, which is more than that,
Right.
right? The
Right.
co-creation is even more than collaboration. We create something new and bigger together than we could create on our own.
Mm-hmm.
How do you bring these complementary, call them sometimes assets, right? These
Yeah.
complementary skills, talents, wisdom, knowledge, resources. How can we bring those together so that we can build something bigger together, or something surprisingly different that we just could not build on our own somehow, right?
Yeah.
Because we have different perspectives, because we have, uh, new ideas, different types of creativity, and how it fits together. Somebody might be a great speaker and the other one might be a great writer, just to give
Yeah.
you a simple example, and they come together in this perfect symbiosis where they can create something beautiful together.
It's interesting. I hear a lot about co-creating, but it
Mhm.
seems there's something that plagues us, and it's this idea of identifying categories. Like,
Mhm.
one I hear all the time is that, like, I think that we all could benefit from having more woman founders out there. But often one of the problems I hear is that a lot of people are like saying that there's no funding for women out there. They get such a small percentage of it. Like, do you think it's a problem when we identify as a group, like when we play like group dynamics? Doesn't that on some level drive a wedge in between the people that need to fund the people and stuff like that? Like breaking us down into like groups, that seems to be a problem for me. Like, why can't just the best ideas win?
Yeah, I'm absolutely for the best ideas to win. I'm
Yes.
absolutely for merit-based everywhere in
Right.
companies. I just talked to a lady the other day who said, I should have been promoted to this and that, position last year, but I was told that I couldn't because they had to promote a diverse person. And I mean, first of all, I have to laugh because we are all diverse, right?
Such a good answer. Yes.
Yeah, and then, I mean, how can one person alone be diverse? That's not possible. So so that's not okay, because that creates division, that creates
Yes.
resentment, that creates all the things that
Yep.
we supposedly want to not create with these initiatives. It's just not right. So yes, everybody should have the same possibilities, the same
Yeah.
opportunities. Sometimes it's also what we do with them. And I'm not saying that there has never been discrimination or whatnot. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, we are taking it to an extreme where we are constantly putting people into, you call it categories, I often call it boxes, and we
Right.
forget to see the individual. To see the human being. And you know what? For me, inclusiveness is exactly that, to see the individual human being with all their unique
Yeah.
greatness and unique brilliance, because that's what it's all about. Because when we do that, the discrimination goes away automatically, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. When you shine a light onto differences, that's what you find. But when you
Yeah,
shine a light into, you know, a diverse group of thoughts coming together, that's what you find. And I think we get that mixed up sometimes
yeah,
because there's so much emotion involved in it. And it's
right.
fascinating. I do think we're on the precipice of creating a better world where a more diverse group of people can come together and solve problems. But we kind of have to get out of our own way, I think.
Yeah, and out of this conformity thinking,
Yeah.
because a lot of those initiatives actually drive us into more conformity rather than more
Yeah.
diversity of thought, more diversity
Yeah.
of perspective, and we need to be really careful to not cross that line too much, because it is a lot about it is really a lot about mind control, frankly, and
Agreed.
politicizing the topic. So to come back to to the funding, so I've heard this too. I don't have all the exact data. I'm not so much a data person. I really look at how can we find a solution for the individual, or if it's a training group, whatever,
Right.
or a team, how can we find a solution, right? So not so much looking at, poor me, I'm not getting the funding. I'm looking at, okay, what can you do? Right?
Right.
What can you do to maybe get it? And some businesses don't get funding easily. If I create a
Yeah.
coaching business, and a lot of women who are founders in that sense, or who are entrepreneurs, they are in coaching, they are in activities that don't as easily attract funding, I think, also because we're natural caretakers, at least to some extent. And we also need to look at, okay, how is this data composed? And I
Right.
don't know the exact answer, but from we're observing, there are women who get funding when they have physical products
Yeah.
more easily, for example, right? We could maybe get, some people get grants, but I think it's a difficult topic. I really don't know that it is because they are women, frankly, and I'm not contradicting it. I
Right.
just don't know.
Yeah. I I really think that there's a opportunity for maybe for us to move past the idea of founders and start working as like a team of founders. I think that when one individual is a founder, it really puts a lot of pressure on you to
Mhm.
to be this incredible thing that doesn't really I don't know that one person creates anything. It seems like a team of
Yeah.
people create or give energy to an idea. And when when you look at, I don't know, it just seems odd to me. But I think the future is going to be a lot more co-creation. And once we start getting over these rigid ideas of categories and blaming things and stuff like that, I think we're going to move into this world where we have a lot of abundance. And that, it kind of brings me up to this idea about networking. And in your experience, what role does networking play in career advancement, and how can individuals effectively leverage networking opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. Networking is, of course, key.
Right.
We know it, right? Now, I would say sometimes it's worth going outside of the regular networking path, like walking a little bit outside of that. So instead of, for example, if you're in an organization, you want to build your internal network or extend it, then maybe go a little bit outside of uh, your business line, right? And look into other business lines within the organization. Go outside of your organization also. I used to be a member of the Financial Women's Association's leadership group, not because I'm a financial woman, but I wanted to connect with these women
Yeah.
because I can help them. And so I did a lot of volunteer work, setting up events, doing some speaking also through that, right? And there were networking with other women, of course, in other organizations, but then also, and gladly so, there were women, or also some men, but mostly women in this case, who came in from other industries and joined them, because I noticed also that they could actually benefit from potentially providing services. And it's not just about coaches. There were lawyers, there were
Yeah.
other professions that connected as well. And I believe that when we show true curiosity and interest for what other people bring to the table, then they are also more easily willing to help us out and make introductions and connections. I love to connect people and build bridges.
Yeah.
And when somebody does that, they will also get offered new connections that might potentially lead to new business or a collaboration or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for the bridge builder, someone who can go into, a group or some meetings and maybe not come out with anything for themselves, but can come out with something for the other person. Like, you know what, who you should talk to is this other person over here. I noticed you guys share this thing. And I think that's a vital part of building who you are, building an identity or even a business, is just being able to understand the connections. And I think that's where networking can really play a big part of it, which connects to the idea of meaning. Where do you put the idea of like a deeper sense of purpose in business? Like how does that fit into the idea of business in your mind, like a deep set of purpose?
Yes. First of all, I believe that purpose has several meanings, right? And it
Yeah.
depends on how everybody defines it for themselves. I believe my purpose is twofold, or maybe threefold. One is growing in life, growing as who I am, call it a soul being
Right.
or whatever you want to call it. Um, Another is to make or to have an impact, to make a difference, to do something, as you call, meaningful, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that has intrinsic meaning, and that could be, that could be cleaning. It could be anything, really. It doesn't always have to be something like,
Yeah.
a speaker that speaks to millions of people from a stage. Then the third is to really also then that type of, yeah, so really growth, that making a difference, and also feeling that this is aligned with who I am, right? So it doesn't feel inauthentic, so that actually I can be happy while doing it, while I might not be happy at every little moment. Overall I feel fulfilled and happy with what I do. Okay. I believe some people can find this outside work. Some people, do their work because they want to do their work and make a certain amount of money, and then they volunteer or they find it in their family, whatever. I just don't think that's, for most people, that's not sustainable forever. That's at some point frustration sets in, or maybe even depression or
Mm,
burnout. That's why it's important, at least for most people, to do the work we love, or at least a piece of the work we love, and also feel
right.
recognized
Yep.
through it. Because if we only work, and if we even love the work, but nobody sees it ever, and we are never acknowledged, then that can also lead to frustration, of course.
Yeah, I want to touch on that for a minute. Like the idea that, and I think this happens to most people in your life, is that you begin creating something and maybe you're happy with it for a while, but then it doesn't go the way you want, and you lose that inspiration, or you lose that fire, or you lose the motivation, and or maybe it's just an age thing where like you've aged out of something and you're no longer finding the passion and joy in there. What and for some people that can be a blessing later, like leaving something behind that you no longer want to do and taking an opportunity to reinvent yourself, whether it's magic or tragic. In your case, it took losing everything in order for you to rebuild something new that you was a new part of you. Maybe you could speak to that transition. Like, what is
Mhm.
that something that happens with most people? And what do you do when you have left everything and you're starting something new? What's that transition like? And what are some tips and tricks you can help people maybe move through there?
Yeah, for me, it was also harsh in a way because I really had not planned on
Right.
leaving Rio de Janeiro, but my work permit was somehow also eventually lost because I didn't pay the authorities off. I was fighting it. I was like, I have this thing, I want to stay in my integrity. I don't
Right.
claim corruption. Okay. Was not an easy thing to do, really, because I really wanted to stay in Rio de Janeiro. However, I also had this inkling that I, at some point, potentially wanted to live in New York City, which I hadn't really seriously considered before. And when I arrived in New York City, I was literally standing there and saying, "Hey, what am I going to do with all this eclectic experience, with the resilience I have gained, with all my leadership
Right.
experience at BCG, with the different languages?" Now coming back to an English speaking, territory after speaking, of course, Spanish and Portuguese for 7 years, without a network in New York
Yeah.
City, not knowing anybody except for like maybe three people who were always busy and traveling for work. So it was a completely new start, but I was excited, and I said, okay, how am I going to fit all of this together into something meaningful? Here it comes again,
Right. Yep.
uh, where it could have meaning for me personally, give me satisfaction, but also make a difference. And that's how Transform Your Performance was born, this coaching, speaking, and training business. Of course, it wasn't from one day to the next, and I had to do a lot of clarity finding. I had to, first of all, gain my confidence back and my self-esteem. That's also how eventually I wrote the book that I wrote, Speak Up, Stand Out, and Shine, because I had to come up with crutches for myself, some tools and techniques that allowed me to even go network and speak about a business that didn't even exist yet. Right. So
Right.
all these different things that we encounter on this path. Yes, and I, it wasn't totally clear in the beginning what exactly it should be, who exactly I wanted to work with. It was all a journey. I believe that sometimes when we're not on the right path, or when it's time to take the curve, or to, have uh, or just really go in a new direction, do
Right.
something different. If we don't do it, if we drag it out too long, if we resist it and procrastinate, the universe sometimes steps in and says, "Hey, you know what? Here you go. Here you
Yep.
go. I'm going to take it all away from you. Now you see how you resolve it, right?" And that's when this blessing moment, as you mentioned earlier, I believe, if I remember well, when you said, sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. A lot of
Yeah.
people can't see it in the moment, because that's when we are shocked, when sometimes we're even devastated, when we're in pain. But later we recognized that this somehow had to happen so that we would embark on a different journey. And I see this also with clients of mine who get laid off. Some of them
Yep.
have been like considering like playing with the idea for a while, but they didn't want to take the step. And all of a sudden, boom,
Yep.
and then they got to take the step, but then they actually often are relieved because it was no longer right for them. you know and it could be anything really. Hopefully for some people it's a sickness. Hopefully for most people
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be that. A lot of people also go through deep transformation when they get seriously sick.
Yeah, I I love the holistic and borderline spiritual approach to it. I think that there is a force bigger than us, and it's gonna walk you up to the edge and then push you if you don't jump. It's like, okay, you gotta jump, and I can't do it. And then there's just this force that says, "Yep, you sure can," and it's gonna push you off. And like it's that leap of faith that is not only frightening but liberating on some level. When you take that jump, you no longer have the weight of the world on your shoulders. You may have a new weight on your shoulders. You may have the fear of falling on your shoulders. But I heard a good quote that said the difference between fear and excitement is a breath. And I think that's what happens to people, and it's, I hope that people who find themselves pondering the idea of starting something new and creating a new pathway in life versus staying with this old thing that's creating a lot of misplaced anger, I hope they choose the first option, because the world's trying to tell you there's a better option for you, but you got to believe in yourself to do it. And you touched on something that I want to go back to for a moment, and that is this: when you moved to New York, you had to build crutches and tools in order to get to the spot that you wanted to be. Is that something like, can you just talk about that a little bit? Did you need to know that you had to build a tool to get where you wanted to be, or was it like an energy? Or let's talk about that for a
Yeah.
minute. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, so I had studied a lot of holistic stuff,
Okay.
holistic modalities like body talk and then some other
Yeah.
really powerful modalities. And those gave me a lot of the tools I needed to transform back into my courageous self and
Right.
into my more confident self. And of course, they gave me ideas for tools, right? For example, how to trigger a feeling of confidence. I had learned that I could anchor something in my muscle memory and then just trigger it if I needed it
Yeah.
for like a challenging situation, like speaking in front of an audience, for example, or going to a networking event. I had learned how energy works, that I could use energy tools, right? And optimize my energy to enhance my presence, my perceived presence, and to at the same time, and this is why I love the energy tools, uh, raise my confidence level with those exercises, right? And these are what I call the crutches that I later put into my book, Speak of Stand Out and Shine, because I figured that they could help other people as well, and I wanted them to be available also to other people. And I also want to touch on something else that you said. So you talked about fear
Hmm.
and excitement. I sometimes also call it to turn anxiety into excitement, because sometimes it's that anxiety, borderline fear that we experience, especially when we move or want to stay in this so-called comfort zone, which is actually not comfortable at all once we know we want to get out of it. So actually, I call it usually the convenience zone.
Oh.
And why do we not want to step out of that? Because there's uncertainty outside of that, and there's fear that we need to face. But there's also no courage without fear. We
Right.
cannot have courage, which by the way is also in our heart. We can find courage in our hearts, because fear is in our minds, courage is in our hearts, right? And and uh, and if we cannot feel fear, we do not feel fear, how are we going to find courage. Courage
Yes.
is doing it despite the fear. Fear can actually be a really great transitioning tool, to call it something, into the jump that you mentioned,
Yeah.
right? Without that fear, maybe nothing happens actually if we don't face that fear. So it's okay to face that fear and acknowledge it instead of suppressing it, and make a decision to move through it and face it, and then say, okay, I'm going to do it anyway. And then it might feel still a little scary, but it feels already better because you know that you're moving, you know that you're taking action, you know that you're taking the next step. And sometimes action means just sitting down and reflecting and making a plan if you're not ready yet to take the first step. That's fine. Also, a lot of people struggle with confusion. I always say confusion is the first step to clarity. Don't
It's
be
true.
afraid of confusion. If you're not in a state of confusion and you want to have big change in your life, how would you get there? If you never go through confusion, you will never start thinking and reflecting and listening inside of yourself. At least this is my take on it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And this is why people should be clicking the link below and checking out your books and reaching out to you, is that you have a wealth of knowledge and, more than that, lived experience. What's it like to, when you talk about confusion being the first step to clarity, or finding tools in order to be stepping stones and to get to the places where you are, that's hard enough when you're in your own environment. But what's that like to go to another continent, another country, and try to put that into action?
Yeah. So I sometimes traveled with a job, but sometimes I also traveled to a whole new continent with just a dream in my pocket.
I love it.
When I left my job, my leadership role at BCG San Francisco, I packed up everything I had. I flew down to Buenos Aires to open a bed and breakfast. I had no idea of how to write a business plan. I had no idea whether I needed a business plan. I had no idea of how it all worked, whether I'd find a house, how a bed and breakfast even works. I went there and I started doing it. And you know what? It was number one on TripAdvisor for the entire time almost it was open. And you know why? Because we didn't have as many tools back then. There was not as much online. But yes, I set up a simple website in 4 languages or whatever. Just everybody could understand it. It was pretty basic. And I signed up for TripAdvisor. And I had this idea that if I sent every single guest a review link afterward that they could easily fill out in 1 or 2 minutes, that they would do that. And this is how I got to number one, I believe. Also because I had great mattresses and the most amazing breakfast of all the other 44 bed and breakfasts. Okay, sometimes even made the bread myself. So, and really great tourist service, information where I told people about things a little bit off the beaten track, which is what I like to see when I travel. So plus, and here comes the collaboration, right, George? I made friends with a neighboring bed and breakfast, and they soon sent me their overflow because they were more established, longer established. And so we exchanged guests when we had, my place was relatively small.
Yeah.
So I sent people to them and they sent people to me. And that's how it worked.
It's on. It's beautiful, and I think this does speak to the idea of collaboration. It doesn't have to be this zero-sum game where, like, you are here and I'm here, and if you don't lose, I don't win. It doesn't have to be like that. But for some reason, it seems we've been plagued by this all or nothing mentality, and people can work together and be successful and be even better. And we can have our own ecosystem of people that are willing to trust a little bit. And it's hard. Like you said in the beginning of the story, like, you can get burned, and you probably will get burned. And if you do get burned, what lessons did you learn from getting burned? And
Right.
it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And even, you know what? I had the craziest stories with this.
Nice. Let's hear them.
Like this one story when I sent my money down to Argentina, right? I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's a little, but at some point this money had disappeared on its path to Argentina. And I had to literally find it again because the guy who was helping me with this, his English wasn't great.
Mhm.
So I found my money again on the internet. Can you believe it, George? I don't know how.
Right.
Somebody must have, like my spirit guide must have said, look here, look here, look
Right.
here. Because there was no other way, no other way. I was like so baffled when I said, oh, here it is, here's my money. How did I even get here? I would never be able to describe it again. So the money was gladly not lost, right? But later, I actually had to transport that money from where it was to the seller's bank. And we had to pay cash in Argentina at the time, at least. It could still be like that. You had to pay dollars in cash at the bank. So you can imagine this, like you're sitting around a table at a bank, at the seller's bank usually, and you're counting dollars, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then you pay, and then you sign, and then it's yours. So it was not recommended to take a cab just outside the bank where I was picking the money up, or the place, because there were cases when taxi drivers actually were observing that, and robbing people. So I found myself on a hot summer day in Buenos Aires carrying several $100,000 across the city in my socks from one bank to the other. Can you believe, like, one
That's
wrong
so
move,
funny.
right? Money falling on the street, like, and it could have been gone. Like, I have more of those stories. Many. I actually did it again when I sold again. So anyway,
What were you born with an adventurous spirit? Like it sounds like you have these. Did you have similar adventures as a kid growing up? Like, is this something you're born with? Do you think?
well, here's the thing, right? I was very shy as a kid, extremely
Okay.
shy. There were also not many kids my age in the village of 10 houses where I grew up in. I grew up on a small farm as the oldest of five. And what I did see, though, is my dad, although, we could never travel as kids for vacation because my parents never had a vacation. They could never get away. My dad had a full-time job in addition to the farm, so you can imagine, but we did
Yeah.
go to the mountains sometimes, which were not too far away. Whenever my dad had time and could make it, we would go to the mountains, and he would go also on ski tours and stuff like that. So he loved adventure. Actually, he took his bike to Budapest once, a simple bike, like back then, right? Not these modern whatever.
Right.
No, it was a very simple bike. He rode it to all the way to Budapest from our little village in the southeast Germany, not too far from Salzburg. And and then later with the same friend, they went all the way down to, I think it was the same friend anyway, to almost Rome, Italy, where it's like all hills, and that's the stuff he did when he could, right? And later I found out that we actually had an extremely adventurous person in our family, in my dad's lineage, who I never met. I never knew about him until a few years ago when there was a documentary about him. This guy traveled up all the Nile from East Africa, where the Nile starts, like, Uganda, Rwanda, all the way up to Egypt in a boat by himself. That's the crazy thing to read. I don't know that anybody has ever repeated that or survived that, right? He was almost eaten by crocodiles once. He was thrown into prison once because he needed a permit, which he actually had to travel through a specific area. He ate with the pygmies. And, I mean, it was like everywhere he slept, everywhere he stopped. Sorry, he ate and and slept with the people he encountered along the way. This was this guy, and he had also actually climbed mountains that hardly anybody has ever climbed, and by himself. And he was just not famous. He did presentations, slide presentations, to finance his trips and so on, but he wasn't like world famous. He just did these things very humbly by himself. And he did have an older friend who sometimes was with him, and then sadly he was killed actually at the end of this trip,
What?
and probably arriving to Egypt. In Egypt, it was almost done because we know because there's proof in the form of postcards and some photos that he would send with those cameras that we have back then, the instant cameras.
Right.
Yeah, but it's a really, really fantastic story. I had no idea. So when you asked about adventurous spirit, it's probably coming from that lineage.
I love it. And to me, it speaks to the idea of success. It seems it is, at least in the Western world, we identify success with lots of money in a bank or living a comfortable life. But perhaps for some people, a successful life could be an adventurous life, someone who's taken chances and someone who's traveled and someone who has a, a, a wealth of stories they could tell by a campfire that would keep people captivated. Like, I'm hopeful that we can begin to see success or broaden our definition of success into these things. And I think that when you do that, I think that you have more to give. It seems like someone with a lot of money has a lot to give, but maybe someone with a lot of experience has even more to give. And I think that's one thing that's unique to you, is that you have all these adventures, you have all these amazing stories. And that is where I think a real teacher can stand out. And I think that's what you are, where you're helping so many cool people and you've written these things. And I think you're just getting started on some level. You have all these cool things, but maybe you could speak to this idea of delegating 10 to 20 hours a week of busy work. And how leaders
Yes.
can effectively identify tasks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do, I just really wanted to pick that idea up really quickly because,
Yeah,
a
please.
rich life, to me, as you said, to me, it's about having a freaking amazing life. That is, this is really what I call a freaking amazing life. It's not always perfect. It has its ups and downs.
Yes.
We all have them, but it's about, okay, do you live the life that is aligned with you, right? With who you are. But
Yeah.
to come back to your question, yes, yes. So I have created what I call a taskmaster tool. It's a very simple tool. I made it in Excel where we identify activities. I made this once for a client who needed it, and then I created it as a freebie,
Yeah.
for other people as well, and where we really identify, okay, what are activities that are indispensable, what are activities that we don't really need to do. If those are the ones that usually go away when we don't get to them in a week or so, right? And all of a sudden they magically disappear and nobody cares if they're ever done. Then there are things that we need to delegate. And sometimes that doesn't depend on us. So we have to negotiate the delegation. And when we're in a leadership role where we have that, what we call authority sometimes, or that decision
Yep.
making, power, then we can decide it for ourselves. But then we also need to trust our team because we cannot delegate, or it's hard to delegate when we do not trust. We want our team to trust us as leaders. We want to build trust, but do we trust our team? This is a two-way path, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's also an important learning curve for a lot of leaders, because it's of course sometimes hard to trust that somebody does it equally well as we. But what if they could even do it better?
Yeah.
And some people feel threatened by that too, right?
Yep.
But a lot of times I think is that we don't trust that they can do it as well as we do. And maybe it doesn't always have to be perfect. Maybe it just sometimes has to be good enough. And maybe it's not perfect, not not even good enough the first time around, and then we need to step in, but then, and support, not do it ourselves again, not step in that way, but support so that we can then create that learning curve for the people who eventually can do it themselves. And over time, this will free up, of course, a lot of busy time. I also believe that sometimes just by taking a break, we can actually save time. When we are too stressed out or anxious or any of those states where we feel debilitated, it's really hard to focus. A little break can do wonders at times too. But again, to come back to that very simple tool, Taskmaster, it has several different columns where here we do categorize.
Yeah.
Categorize into tasks or activities according to also whether they are important for our career, whether they give us visibility, whether they're important for the next level we want to get to, so that we can make sure we have enough time also to focus on our own career growth, if that's something we want. Because a lot of people just shove more, and especially women oftentimes, they shove more tasks and responsibilities onto their already full plates, thinking that someday they will discovered and rewarded for it with a promotion or a raise. And that's just usually not how it happens. And they don't realize that they get busier and busier and busier, but they don't really have the time to be visible and to do presentations to decision makers or participate in a panel or find those opportunities for themselves. So I also want my clients to be very conscious and deliberate about what new responsibilities they take on and which ones they better leave to the side.
It's fascinating to me to get to hear the different perspectives of someone with so much lived experience. Additionally, I'm always intrigued by someone who can speak multiple different languages. It seems to me when you can do that, you're forced to think in different languages, which forces you to see the world in a bigger way. Like you're able to see the symbolic meaning of things that maybe other people can't. Like if you only speak one language, you have like this sort of lens that you put on and you see the world. But if you can see through 3 different shade color glasses, all of a sudden you can tell the lilies from the roses, and you can tell the Venus flytrap from this other carnivorous plant over here. But maybe you can speak to this idea of how not only getting to travel to these different continents and countries, but also getting to speak the language has helped you model reality in a different way.
Absolutely. Different languages have different structures, they have different grammar, and that tells you that people think differently. Okay. And there are words that are untranslatable. Like, for example, the Portuguese word saudade in European Portuguese pronunciation, or saudade in Brazilian, it means something like yearning, something like many things, like missing somebody, like can have all these different meanings, but there's no exact translation for that word.
Mm-hmm.
It could be nostalgia, but you have always to somehow describe it or use a translation depending on the context. And that happens, I think, with any language, right? There are languages where certain concepts have 10 words where we only have 1. It is really amazing how that works, right? I believe that you're absolutely right. It opens up your horizon. You start thinking in different structures and different types of logic, because also languages have their logic. Maybe the English language the least.
Yeah,
But at least as far as pronunciation is concerned. But yeah. And then, even your mouth adapts, everything adapts according to what language you speak the most. I had this experience, for example, when I spent my first few years in Spain, and I would come back or go back home to Germany once a year, and I could not pronounce the German S. Everybody would say, "Du lispelst." The German speakers here can know what that means. I was like speaking like with an S that did not sound German. Okay, not at all. It sounded Spanish, and it took me several days to be able to pronounce that naturally again. So it was really interesting. Also, my siblings always laugh at me when I visit home now, especially my younger sister. She likes to tease me with these things. The word you just said does not exist. I make words up because I get influences from other languages, and
Yeah.
then I just make them up. And sometimes, even if in your own native language, you say the other way around as it would be in this other language. It happens sometimes. So it doesn't mean you mix everything up. It just, there are certain, words. But
Yeah.
anyway, it's a very interesting concept, how culture flows into the language, just as culture flows into the dance. I love to dance and to observe all these different
Yeah.
dances. I've learned a bunch of lessons through dance for business and for leadership as well. So, there's all this there are these different aspects of culture, also how languages sound.
Mm.
Some languages sound very abrupt, like German can sound abrupt. European Spanish can sound abrupt too. Latin American Spanish, the different versions of it usually sound less abrupt. They sound more, I don't know what to call it now, softer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or European Portuguese sounds completely different to Brazilian Portuguese, to an extent that sometimes they don't understand each other, and the movies have to be dubbed. Really. So, you know, it's such an interesting phenomenon. Language is also
Yeah.
probably one of the reasons I why I love to pick language apart and question so much, because when you learn a foreign language, you want to understand the logic sometimes, or the why something is called a certain way. Now, when I look at certain terms in business that don't make sense to me, then I just cannot use them. I will never use it. The term time management doesn't make any sense to me. Priority management, yes, but time management, we cannot manage time. Time just is. It doesn't let itself be managed, and that's why people get so frustrated when they want to manage it.
Yeah.
But or work-life balance, what is that even? Right? Work is part of life, and balance we're not going to achieve anyway. It's again about priorities. It's about what's most important right now, maybe in your life.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's mind blowing to me. Like I had never thought of in my life how speaking a certain language could change your facial features. But why wouldn't it? Of course, like those are all the muscles in your face. And if you pronounce this a certain way, it's going to change the way you look. And then that bleeds into, why does this culture look this way versus this way? Or, it's so mesmerizing. Or even dance. I never thought about that either. But what does that speak to when someone does the samba? Like that's such a different relationship than someone that's doing this other dance over here. Like it speaks to the idea we interact with each other and why maybe this culture doesn't really get along with this culture. Like they have you can see it everywhere. It's amazing. Thank you
yeah.
for sharing that.
Yeah, and I believe, maybe your face doesn't completely change through it, but
A
your
little bit.
face muscles adapt.
Yeah,
They adapt,
sure.
and what becomes easier to pronounce is now, some things are now becoming easier to pronounce versus other things. Now, then, when you start speaking a different language again more often, or for the first time more
Yeah.
often, then you adapt to that, right? That's why when we even spoke a language in the past and haven't spoken it in a while, why it's harder to pronounce it correctly again, because everything has adapted.
Yeah, and I like what you said about structure too. Sometimes you put the noun before the verb or the verb before the noun. Like, you can see that in society. Well, this is more important than this action. We're going to talk about it right now. And some people are like, we're going to do it right now. Like, I bet there's a lot of similarities in the structure of the language and the structure of the action, right?
But I don't know. I mean, in German
Weird.
we put the verb always at the end, so we would never take action, right? But with, that's what makes the translators work so hard for when they have to translate to German or to know actually from German, because
Yeah.
until the end of the sentence they don't know what the person's gonna say in terms of the verbs. But in English, for example, would come at pretty much at the beginning, not exactly, but yeah. So that's what makes the life of a translator hard sometimes.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see. Is sign language universal? Like, I don't know. Are you familiar with sign language for people that are?
I'm not, and actually it meant interpreting, not translating just now,
Right.
because translation is usually used for written, but yeah,
Yeah.
so for interpreters. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know, but I would think so. You know what? That's a question that I asked
I'm gonna
myself
write it
once, and
down.
then I forgot to actually look it up. So I have to look it up now.
Me
Maybe
too.
in the audience there's somebody who knows.
Yeah. If there's anybody in the chat right now, put it in there. I would love to. I would love to see that. It's just fascinating, the idea of language and communication and all these ideas that we have about translating and interpreting and taking action, and it's wonderful to me. I Regina, this is a fascinating conversation, and just like that, an hour already blows by. It's so much fun to talk to you. I hope that everybody will take a moment to go down to the show notes and check out the books. Reach out to you as someone who is a coach and a leader and someone with lived experience, but more than that, someone who sees life as an adventure. I think that the world needs more of that, and I think that you are uniquely placed to help people see the adventure in life and in themselves. But before I let you go, what do you have coming up? Where can people find you, and what are you excited about?
Yes, I have several new projects in the works right now. I just cannot talk too much to them yet. But yeah, there are some collaborations actually going on, and I am considering also to do a co-creation project for a podcast with a friend in South Africa. So that's something I think I can already say. Again, just really the usual, lots of exciting projects, some online workshops in the works, a masterclass on pay raises coming up next week again. I have done some similar ones. This one is going to be a little bit shorter because sometimes people don't have an entire hour. So I am focusing specifically on pay raises in this one, and 3 secrets in that context that people need to know. I have been, and I shouldn't maybe even say this because it might become a commitment, right? But I have been thinking about this new book, and I started jotting down some notes and whatnot. I just haven't really gotten to it yet, but at some point there will be another book. And yeah, I always, love working with bold, value-driven, and people-centric leaders. So if you need anything in your career for your leadership presence, your leadership skills, I'm here to work with you, to support you. Reach out and we'll have a chat.
Well, hang on briefly. I'll speak to you briefly afterwards about a few small details. But ladies and gentlemen, I cannot recommend Regina enough. Go down to the show notes, go check her out. And I hope everybody has a beautiful day and a beautiful weekend. And I hope you choose to live an adventurous life and do some pondering on your idea of success. That's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. Aloha.